Welcome to Adventure CEO Leadership Insights, your continuing conversation with entrepreneurs and other modern day adventurers that are sharing their quest to continually expand opportunities for their families, their teams, and the communities they serve. I'm Jeffrey Wolf, your host. I'm glad you're part of the conversation. Make sure you've got something to take notes with. You're not going to want to miss a single insight from these conversations. Our first guest is Chris Epting. He's an award-winning journalist and author of more than 30 books on Americana and pop culture. His true passion is storytelling. He does it so well. He's also been a journalist for LA Times, Wall Street Journal, Travel and Leisure, Huffington Post, to name just a few. He's also a TV host and producer, having created the show It Happened Here for Reels TV. You're going to enjoy the stories and insights that Chris is about to share. Chris, thanks for joining us this morning.
My pleasure.
You've written a lot. You've written for HuffPo. You've written 30 books. I mean, how did you get involved with that? How did you get started as a writer?
Well, I actually, coming out of college back in the early 1980s, I wanted to be a writer. And I had grown up in kind of, if you know the show Mad Men.
Oh, yes.
I sort of grew up in that environment. My dad was a big time Madison Avenue guy. And I always appreciated how in the creative department, when I would visit the agency, that those were the people having the most fun. They wore jeans and it was relaxed and they were enjoying themselves. And so out of college, I got a portfolio together and hit the streets and got a job as a copywriter at an ad agency in New York.
Wow.
I worked my way up, writing lots of commercial copy, and ultimately became a creative director. Wrote, thousands of TV and radio commercials and campaigns over the course of about 25 years or so. So that was sort of my discipline of writing on a daily basis, of being creative, and of sort of telling stories. Because if you write a commercial, there's always got to be a story, some conflict that's resolved. So then in around about the late 1990s, I got started thinking about what else I wanted to do as a writer. And I was getting kind of tired of advertising. I didn't want to just do that the rest of my life. So I took about a year with one client who could sort of help me get over that hump. And I pitched a couple of book ideas that I'd always wanted to write, involving offbeat travel and historic landmarks and things like that. And a couple of those books sold.
So I want to ask about that. With the advertising, you're telling a whole story in 30 to 60 seconds.
Yeah.
Did that help prepare you for the success you had as a travel writer?
It definitely makes you conscious of deadlines, because these were a lot of retail advertising clients. So we didn't have the luxury of working a month on something. You would have, in some cases, hours to come up with stuff. Wow. So it was really, for me, a strong discipline. And then when I sort of, morphed into more journalistic writing and narrative writing and essay writing and book writing, I was deadline conscious. And I learned right away that publishers and editors love that, because there's a lot of people that aren't like that. Mm-hmm. And so I would hit things early and be very conscious about being on time and being thorough. And that was a big plus. I didn't realize that in publishing, that's an issue with a lot of people, and
that's an issue in a lot of industries, actually.
Well, it is, but I think creatively, and not that I don't procrastinate, like a lot of people, I do wait till the deadline, but I'm thinking about it before, and then I sort of tend to sort of crank it at the end, but it's been, fermenting in my brain. And I think a lot of creative people work like that. But it definitely played a part in helping me problem solve and due diligence to things like timelines when I started. But like I said, I really wanted to get into a thing where I could write things that were a little bit more meaningful to me. And there were book ideas I had since I was a kid, wanting to travel and locate and tell stories about historic places where there's no sign or marker. And so I did this book called James Dean Died Here, which was about 600 of those places, and that was amazing.
600?
Yeah.
Wow. Did you have one you could share?
Well, the title of the book, James Dean Died Here, there had always been a lot of speculation about where precisely his car was struck and came to rest.
Okay.
And there had been some good research done on it up until that point, but nobody had really detailed the exact site. And I'm very into precision with these places.
Okay.
I did a ton of research on that to figure out, using all the old police files and reports and things like that, interviewing the two cops who actually were there with James Dean that night when he was struck.
Wow.
And so that was the story in the book that was sort of the centerpiece that allowed all the other stories to have credibility. Because if I went that crazy on that story. Then all of a sudden, when we talk about locating, like another great one in the book, I thought was where Marilyn Monroe's dress billows up in the 7-Year Itch. That's a real subway grading in New York City.
Well, it was
So
actually outdoors. That wasn't it wasn't in a.
they shot it originally outdoors and then went back and shot part of it on a stage. But the famous pictures people know were shot on 52nd Street and Lexington Avenue.
Oh my
And
gosh.
that was another story in the book that got a lot of attention. So this book came out and NPR embraced it. And they made it like their book of the summer. And that was a big help for me because I would go on that show, All Things Considered, every week practically, and sort of lay out these road trips for people. And NPR listeners are still great readers and supporters of books and authors and things. So that really helped this niche develop for me of this, not just a travel writer, but like a travel writer who does things a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of what I believe their embracing of it, I think that allowed for a series of sequels to happen afterwards, which I did over the course of the few years after that. I did about 4 or 5 of those books, eventually a baseball version, a rock and roll version, that were all about finding places where stuff happened that you wouldn't find in any conventional guidebook or map or thing like that. And, as a result, when you do that and you become sort of that guy,
Mm-hmm.
then you get invited to do a lot of speaking or to go on television shows or whatever, because you've always got a kind of a quick story about something, or you can, when people do those kinds of road trips, they basically want somebody, and I think I became that somebody, to do the homework and say, look,
Mm-hmm.
it's easy. Start here. I'll give me 100 miles and I'll give you 20 really cool places you'd never find on your own.
Oh,
And
how
that
neat.
became, that became great content for TV and radio shows.
Mm-hmm.
So I would stay pretty busy doing that, going out and just appeared on dozens, if not hundreds of outlets, telling stories about places, especially during the summertime. And, that of course helps because then you can write more articles about it. And it just, like anything, when you become an expert in any field, it generates, if you want, it allows you to generate more material,
Mm-hmm.
whether you're writing for newspapers or magazines or whatever. So, I was fortunate. And again, I do cite NPR as the first outlet that made a difference in sort of legitimizing that kind of travel and make it seem kind of cool and interesting.
So something that entrepreneurs, I think, are starting to learn is that necessity to tell the stories in their business for their marketplace
Absolutely.
in an engaging way. So you developed an expertise in taking. As an adult, I love history and I love travel because you see so many neat things and the stuff
Yeah.
you learn about where
Too.
you're at. But as a kid growing up, the way it was taught and the way it's presented, a lot of times it's just like, oh my gosh, why bother?
I
But
totally agree.
you create engaging stories.
I remember as a kid, I loved history and I hated the way it was taught. And I
Mhm.
speak at a lot of schools now, from,
Oh, nice.
grade schools up through colleges.
Hmm.
And one thing I notice is the kids have a real hunger. Students have a real hunger for history when it's told with a certain degree of passion and storyline and narrative. And when you make these people real people, they love
Yes.
it. And you can tell there's a hunger for wanting to hear that. And I totally agree that the corporations and brands, it behooves them to tell their story or their client's story in a compelling way. I always try to do that with advertising. I would look at our client and think about not just what the product is, what's the story behind the product? Where did it come from? And I would trace that lineage. And I think people appreciate knowing things like that. People love a good story. I don't care who they are, where they are, what they're doing. They will stop and listen to a good story. And again, I think it's incumbent upon brands to focus and call out what makes their story special in the marketplace. It's hard to get attention today. A good story,
Yes.
I think, really helps you anchor that.
Yes. Well, it's a good story, and you've been very successful about then leveraging that into different opportunities. So you repurpose. There's a lot to talk about repurposing content.
Totally. And well, there is. And I also, I started about 3 years ago doing a memoir writing class here in Huntington Beach where we live.
Oh,
And it's
okay.
another chance to help people tell their story, which I've really gotten into doing in the last few years. I wrote a number of memoirs with people, some well-known people. And I really enjoyed the process of watching somebody kind of awaken to their own story. Like weren't aware it was next to them, like the
Hmm.
sleeping giant. And as a co-writer, you sort of nudge it awake and help them appreciate it and become aware of it. And that experience a number of times to me was really like an epiphany. And I thought, well, if I can get 20 or 25 people together every week and do it, and I've done that for about 3 years, and I really enjoy it. And again, people from all walks of life, from college up to people in their 90s, who will come in each week.
In their 90s.
Oh yeah.
I love that.
Some people in their 90s, some of the sharpest, most passionate storytellers. I think probably because they know they're really near the end, no matter how you cut it. You know what I mean? And there's a pressure that they feel about, well, this is it. This is like, if I don't say it now, it's just not going to happen. It's not going to be preserved.
Well, and do you find that a lot of people are, through that course, really start to get some perspective and understand? A lot of times people don't know what they really know.
Yeah, a lot of it is.
Yeah, they can have an impact.
A lot of it is really just sitting people down and encouraging them to create time and space to focus a little bit, because we're all so pulled in so many directions today that it's almost like people just need somebody to step in and say, okay, here, I'll give you permission to do this. Here's an assignment. I want you to go home this week, and I want you to list these things in your life. And then if you do that, then it sort of forces them, it gives it a reason to exist. And I think a lot of people, they just want that. They want a little bit of motivation, somebody kind of breathing down their neck just a bit, put a bit of pressure on them to do it. And then once they do it, like anything, they realize there's a value to it, and then they'll sort of get into doing it themselves. But it's just that first nudge. That's what I find with most people who take the workshop, is they really just need that first reason to do it, that first degree of permission to believe. And then once you give them that, and push a little bit, then they're on their own, and then they're out in the wild, discovering it on their own and really enjoying it. I mean, again, there's nothing for me like watching people face their former truth, and stories and episodes and things, and begin dealing with it and bringing it to life for other people in the room. It's a really satisfying thing to watch.
Yes, and you have partnered with several high-profile celebrities, rock stars, actresses, in helping them tell their story.
Yeah, that started. I never saw that one coming. That was about maybe, I would say, 6 years or so ago. I'd become friendly with a guy in a band called Def Leppard, Phil Collin, the guitar player, and I'd interviewed Phil a number of times for as a journalist, as a music journalist, and we just hung out a lot. And one day we were talking, and I said, just really out of the blue, if you thought about writing your story, because this is sort of a golden age of music memoirs. A lot of people are writing them, and the books tend to do pretty well when they're well written. And Phil hadn't really thought about it. We were driving to San Diego, I think. He was doing an appearance down there, and over the course of that day, he said, "You know what? It might be something. Would you want to help me with it?" And I absolutely did want to take a shot at it at that point, my first one, and that was the first time. And so we spent about a year and a half doing that. And it was, there were a lot of ups and downs, as there should be, because life can be messy and there's lots of different conflicts that you deal with. But an amazing life, a really fascinating life, and that for me, at the end of that process, I was really intrigued by doing more of those. And then soon after that, I got to know John Oates from Hall & Oates. It's a similar thing. I'd written about him a lot, talking one day, and the subject came up, and we figured out a way to work together. And from that point, I've done, I think, about 6 of those, and I'm in the middle of a couple of them now too. So it'll be part of my life, I think, for at least the near future going forward, because I really enjoy it. And it's when somebody trusts you to do that, to occupy that role as a co-writer, I take it really seriously. They are literally putting their life in your hands.
Yes,
they're trusting you to do this. And
I'd like to ask about that. And let me get some context for this. This isn't trying to dig into so much their experience, but from your side of that writing partnership. As they've gone through that, telling the story, digging into it, doing the reflection, how has that affected them in their perspective on their life experience?
Well, it's had really dramatic effects. It's very much I look at my role as being sort of a therapist. I mean, I've never gone through, say, personal therapy like that, but it feels like this is what it would be like. Because for this whole thing to work, people have got to be really open with you and divulge things they wouldn't tell other people. What I noticed, especially working with John Oates, which to me was sort of the ideal, because John's a writer himself, and so it was really collaborative. He's a really good writer, and he respects the process, and we just had a really good time. He was very engaged on it. But I remember a couple of times he would get to a point telling me a story and he'd say, well, I can't go any further. I've never told anybody what I
Mm.
was about to tell you. And I would say, well, you can tell me. I said, it may not, it doesn't have to go in the book, but I would say to him, there might be something on the other side of it that would
Right.
go in the book. So let's not start editing now. Let's put it all out, and then we'll figure out what makes sense in the context of what goes in the book. And he said, you're right. And then he would tell me things, and I might appear shocked or something. But then after that, there would be some other, little nugget of information that
Mhm.
would be relevant to what we were talking about. And I think the most telling thing came once that book was published, and John and I were together in Las Vegas at a Hall & Oates show. And we had just got the copies of the book, the hard copy. And we're sitting there, and I said to him, are you happy? Are you satisfied? Do you think that we did what we set out to do initially? And he goes, absolutely. He goes, yes, it's more than I dreamed we would do. He goes, but the thing that I really didn't expect to happen was, he goes, the real value of this to me is doing this book forced me to think about things I never would have thought of before. And
Mm.
back to your question, that's what that really struck me, and I thought, wow, there really is a value to this, because unless you commit to some sort of discovery process like this, there are things you'll never revisit from your past ever, because there's no reason to.
Right.
Writing a memoir gives you a reason to go back over everything, whether you use it or not. And I think that's a very healthy process. And I think John nailed it when he said, just the process of going back over time for him, all the ghosts that lived back there, he liked going back and sort of tying up loose ends and confronting things. And, he felt more complete after it was done. And that for me really validated the whole process.
Yes, absolutely. And bringing that back to entrepreneurs, I've heard several business coaches, business experts talk about, and you touched on it, the need to be a recognized expert
Hmm.
in what you do,
Yeah.
and seeing more and more entrepreneurs being encouraged to write books about what they do, but also to bring their life experience in to help connect with their market. Is that, does that tie into, with your experience in writing and also in advertising, is that connection to the marketplace and telling the personal story
Oh,
as important in building that
absolutely. No,
expertise?
I think more so today. I think the more sort of digital layers there are between people, humanity today, I think the personal touch and the relatability, the flesh and blood part of a story gets more important every day as a result of that. I mean, there are really effective entrepreneurs who know how to write their story, who know not just write their story, but make it relevant to what they do and what they're selling, what their services are. And I think, I mean, when I first, I don't say I left advertising because I still do a little bit of it, but when I sort of formally decided to take this leap, I kept a diary for a year, and I self-published,
Oh,
the only book I ever self-published. It's called Diary of an Ad Man. And it was, I wrote every single day for 365 days, and then I stopped it and published that. And to me, it was sort of a treatise on how to, when you decide to leave sort of the mothership and go off on your own, it's what does that feel like? What are the day-to-day feelings
mhm.
like? How does it affect your creativity? How does it affect your productivity? All those things. And it's funny, I got a ton of really great feedback, and I still do to this day about that book, which is now almost 20 years ago. And so I do think it's important when you can relate your personal side of something and connect it again to whatever it is that you actually do, because
Yeah.
people, I think they need to know who you are, and they need to trust that you know what you're talking about. But in knowing where you come from, it's going to maybe force them to think a little bit more about where they come from and what they do.
Yes.
And I think as a motivational piece, a good book, a good memoir by a business expert professional is a really smart idea.
Well, and so you're a very successful writer, successful TV host. You make this transition from what you were doing in advertising when you were doing that journaling for the year. Could you share what was that emotional experience like? Even though you had a lot of success of what you were doing, to take that step.
I'm not a risk taker by nature. So, and
Okay.
honestly, I have to tell you, were it not for, what my wife did and does in terms of maintaining everything else, that to me provided the foundation. You don't
Okay.
have that, nothing else would happen. That really was the faith, sort of based proposition where she believed in it. So she was going to commit her time and energy to creating a scenario where I could do what I was trying to do. And like I said, not being a risk taker, it was nerve wracking. And I, to this day lose sleep over, well, how is this going to work? How am I going to, again, it
Mhm.
never, you always feel like you're treading water. You know what I mean?
Yes.
because there's nothing that regular that comes the way it used to. And I'll never get over that, because I was raised in a very kind of conventional household where there's, the weekly paycheck, whatever, very
Right.
regular kind of system
Get
of
a
that.
good job. Make sure you're doing what you got to do to,
But
work.
the world's changed, and a lot of those jobs, it's like it's not the same way anymore. There are no, gold watches after 50 years of service anymore. You know what I mean? Like our dads all went through. So there's a lot of anxiety, but I would still take it, because I got very frustrated in the context of working, even being creative director. Well, you do have a lot of power, but you're not the one. You're beholden to a lot of other people, and you watch mistakes get made sometimes in real time that you'd like to fix, but you can't fix it because it's beyond your purview or your domain. And
Yes.
so I like being the one to make my own decisions. I like being the one to decide what I'm going to do, when I'm going to do it. That freedom to me is worth the anxiety and the lost sleep.
Yes. And thank you for sharing that. I hear that a lot from entrepreneurs about how taking that leap, how scary that is. Have
Oh,
had special operations, former military folks talk about, yeah, I've seen combat, but it was scarier starting my own business, taking that leap, because like you said, you're out from underneath that umbrella. It's a whole, you're
oh, and literally where I was as a creative director, I was really spoiled. I mean, at a good sized ad agency, if you're in that position, I mean, you have a really good life, and you're doing a lot of fun and interesting things, and you're surrounded by funny, smart people pretty much all the time. And it can be stressful, but you're in it together, and it's good creative work, and there's a lot of perks, there's no doubt. So,
yeah.
so leaving that to me was really the big shift, and being responsible all of a sudden for everything, every follow up. You become your own personal assistant, your own secretary, everything, and but again, it's the freedom that comes along with it. I still think is worth it, and the ability to chase down the things that you really want to chase, not have to get a vote about whether or not you should be chasing those things. I still think outweighs it on the big scale of life.
Well, and you also touched on something, how you and your wife made a team effort with this, and being an entrepreneur really is a lifestyle, and it affects the whole family.
Oh my God, it
Do that.
totally does, and you have to think about that, because it does. Everyone gets dragged along on your experiment, and I'm not even sure that's a really fair thing most of the time, but it's just part of the reality of the situation. And there's always bumps, there's always mistakes, there's always pitfalls. Nothing's perfect. But you can also get fired from a job too. I mean, again, it works
Yes.
both ways in both sides of the universe. And again, I think if you're kind of person that gets a little bit fed up with not being able to control your own destiny,
Mhm.
I think there's a bit of a control freak aspect to anybody that sets up to do that. You want to be the one. If it's going to screw up, you want to be the one that screws it up, because you'll stand by what you did.
Right. Yeah, I completely relate to that. It's a very different feeling to be involved in someone else's goof up and have to take
Yeah,
accountability and try to fix it,
yeah,
as opposed to when I put my own foot in and go, oh, here we go again.
right, right.
So you made the leap. You started writing. You got to travel a lot. Did the travel experiences you have, did that affect how you think about things and look at life?
What I really liked, I had an opportunity to become, again, one of the byproducts of writing those travel books was I got approached in the early 2000s to become the national spokesman for the Hampton Inn Hotel Save a Landmark program.
Oh, wow.
They were looking to, they had this program where they would go out and identify historic properties in need of
Hmm.
attention and money. And they wanted somebody to go out and tell those stories whenever they would do these projects, to go do all the TV shows and talk about it and write about it. And so we started this partnership, which went on for, I think, 7 or 8 years. It was really amazing. And it involved traveling all over the country to these places to become part of these efforts to rescue and breathe life into these historic properties. And my family would go on a lot of the trips and paint and spackle and rake and do all the things. It
Oh,
was really
wow.
a fun, very, very community kind of driven effort. And that for me was really great, because I met a lot of people I never would have met. I saw little corners of the country that were hard to get to, but that we would go on and
Hmm.
do projects in. So from a travel standpoint, that for me was the real eye opener, and really the best experience that I've had as a writer was being the spokesman for that program. We raised millions of dollars and saved a lot of historic places and just put smiles on a lot of faces. And that was the best part for me.
Yes. It's something I've always enjoyed about. We just did a big motorcycle tour a few months ago, And I thoroughly enjoy stopping in the small towns, getting to meet people, because it's always interesting. It's amazing the interesting people you meet along the way, and getting to know them, and to see, how different parts of the country
Totally.
react and do stuff. Did you get to experience a lot of that?
Oh yeah, yeah. There were people that were just I would have no reason to ever, meet them, and not just the people we were working with. I was always and remain somebody that will wander off
Hmm.
in search of little stories or something. I always like to chase things down. It's sort of a natural curiosity, almost a reporter's instinct that I think is in my blood. So I would meet people just along the road, just from place to place, and would always bring along books I wrote just to give out, and I always felt that was a nice connection to sort of share what you do with people and keep, spare copies just to give out and sign and whatever and talk about and, make people, because then what happens is I would hear from people later that would say, oh, what would be a great place for your next book? And I would create this sort of cool network of people uncovering little bits and pieces of unknown sites around the country. So yeah, I used it as an opportunity to really make connections and meet interesting, colorful characters and just soak up a lot of American culture, which I think, I don't think enough people appreciate when you look at just how broad our country is and places where, state to state, how language changes and how attitudes change. Every state's like a country in a lot of ways. And I like that experience of learning about, for me, that forced me to go out into places I wouldn't go before and meet just some really interesting people that definitely made my life better.
I have a question that comes back to, where you're at with your career now. What do you know now that you wish you had known when you were just starting out, when you were making that leap from really a high
Mhm.
level golden handcuffs type of advertising career to being an entrepreneur?
Um, Probably to not always act like such an underdog. I always sort of naturally place myself down at the bottom of the pole. It's a natural insecurity I have, and I think it hurts me sometimes to a degree that I don't sort of claim some things I've done, and I don't know where it comes from. Like I said, I think it's a basic insecurity. And I think, looking back, if I had somebody, a representative or an agent or somebody to go out and fight the battles that I never felt comfortable fighting, that's
Mhm.
something I probably would have changed a little bit.
Okay.
Because like I said, I always feel like I don't belong in what I'm doing. Like there's somebody better that should be doing it, and that always I've had my whole life. I've had that. So that I would have probably aligned with somebody. I'm a little now. There are a couple people I've met that I work with that are good, that are more not cheerleaders, but
Hmm.
they see through that stuff and they'll say, no, you should be doing this, and here's why. And it's more of a confidence thing than anything for me. And so having a couple people like that around today has been really helpful.
Yeah, I have that. That is, thank you so much for sharing that. That's amazing. I have a viewer comment as you're watching this. Think about where you're at in your business, in your life. So here we're talking with Chris, 30 plus books, more on the way, successful TV host, 8 years working on the Save Historic Landmarks project as a representative. That is a perspective on where he started. So how does that represent? How does that bring itself to life in your life, in your career, where you're putting yourself at the bottom of the totem pole, so to speak, as opposed to acknowledging what you've really accomplished and what you're capable of. So thanks, Chris, for sharing that.
My pleasure. It's the truth.
Wow.
And I don't see it going away anytime soon. It's just part of
Yes.
my reality.
Well, and it's so important. I wish that my father taught me that lesson. I didn't really get it until much later in life, on the power of surrounding yourself with people that can provide that perspective, and they can give a little nudge going, hey, what are you thinking on this? And uh, so to keep me from running off the cliff with a bad decision,
No, it matters.
or
It
going, hey,
definitely
what do
matters.
you mean you can't?
And again, sometimes you don't recognize your own strength, or you take it for granted, or you think that everybody, I mean, I tend to think that everybody kind of thinks like this.
Mhm.
Everybody chases down these ideas, but they don't, and, everyone's got their thing that they do. And I love watching an expert. Nothing pleases me more than going to see a specialist talk. Even if I'm not that interested in the topic, I love hearing a good specialist talk about something they're passionate about.
Mhm.
I like, that to me is enough. And so that's one thing I always try and do is leave people with a sense of whatever they may think about what I do. I do a lot of public speaking, that they at least feel like I care about it, that I'm still really excited about it, and that I try every day to get better at it. You know, that I don't ever rest. That's a big thing with me, is never resting on any kind of laurel. I mean, I still read books about writing like all the time. I try
Okay, so
and learn.
you're still very focused on mastery, right? That's a
Oh
lot.
gosh, I mean, I read vocabulary books almost every day. I try and learn a new word or two every day. I mean, I'm always in the middle of reading 4 or 5 books at the same time. And oftentimes those books are about writing, you know. And yeah, I feel like I've barely scratched the surface. And I want to get much, much, much better at stuff that I do, especially in working with people. If I'm going to do more of these memoirs, I want to. I mean, I feel like I've got, you know, parts of it figured out, but I think there's another level that it can go to, that with the right subject, we can do things that maybe haven't been explored yet in terms of memoir.
Yes, and you're great at pulling story out, helping people craft their story. When you mentioned how much you like working with specialists, looking at it from their side of the table, what do they need to consider when working with someone like you to help bring their
Well, I
story to
think
life?
they need to know that, you know, when I worked in as a creative director, the client was always king. I mean, I always, to a fault. I mean, I would really encourage everybody to think about what the client, not what we needed. We would
Mhm.
succeed if the client succeeded. That was sort of my working attitude. And even if there was a commercial that might have been looked better on our reel or won some awards, if I didn't think it was going to help the client, I would nix that, because it was all about the client, and because they were paying our bills. And as a writer, as a co-writer, I always feel like I want people that I work with to understand that I'm there for them. It's their life story, not mine, that we're telling. And so I'm going to do whatever I can do to craft what they want. It's not about me, it's about them.
Mhm.
And I think that's where the trust comes into play. And if they feel like someone's going to take that very seriously, and always kind of have their back on those things, then that makes for a good working relationship. So that's what I want them to feel. It's what I think I do. It's what I think I bring to the table,
Mhm.
is a trust and a passion and an energy that's going to help them unlock all the things they've always wanted to unlock in terms of their story. And that's just about creating a good, comfortable situation where they feel like the haven is safe enough to share. You know what I mean? It's
Mm.
sort of like
Okay.
this memoir class I do. It's funny because you'll get 20, 25 people who it's a 6 week thing. And the first night you can tell no one can imagine standing up and reading really intimate stories from their life. And then by week 3 or 4, everybody's doing it. It's not so much because of me. They trust the room. They trust the space and the people. Everyone's there for the same reason. And
Okay.
once that happens, that's a really nice moment, because then that's when great things happen. That's when people really reach deeper and you know, confront and present things that are vital. And it's the same thing when you work with somebody. There's always a moment, a line that you cross where it's like, I can always tell the difference. Where, okay, now we're in a different part of the ocean where it's going to get a lot more interesting. And I like when you get to that point, because
Mhm.
that's when you know the real stuff is going to come.
Yes, I've heard it said on the other side of discomfort is where the magic happens.
Absolutely, that's if it's true.
So how I appreciate you being with us today, Chris. I'm watching the clock, and we're starting to run short on time. Is there anything else you want to share with what you're working on now? You have the course that you were just talking about. What's next for you, and how can our
I'm in the middle. I have a book coming out in November that we finished a number of months ago with the former Leif Garrett, the actor in Teen Idol,
oh
which,
wow.
which I think is, I'm super proud of, and I think is a really strong memoir. I have a couple of other memoir projects in the middle of co-writing that I can't talk about yet because they haven't been announced, and I'm also working on a new TV project that I can talk about that's based on my book Roadside Baseball, that we're currently out shopping. And this is a chance to sort of travel the country and pull together not just baseball stories, but sort of a reflection of how baseball affects American culture. And
Mhm.
whether you're a baseball fan or not, why the game matters and how it's touching your life, even if you're unaware of it. Because I do believe that. I do think that baseball is a special game that is, you know, deeply woven into the thread of American culture. So we have a good production company now that have put together a wonderful pitch, and so we're out there now currently shopping that around. That hopefully next baseball season we will be traveling the country, pulling together wonderful stories about baseball in America.
So as you're watching this, you want to keep in touch with Chris on this. See, learn more about that show as it comes about, the books that are coming out, and also the memoir class. So, Chris, how can we do that?
I have a website, which is simply chrisepting.com. And there's a lot of information there about my books, about the TV shows, the classes on there as well. And you can check it out there. And if people live in Orange County, California, they're welcome to sign up for the class. I do it every season. So we're currently in the fall season, the winter one, then a spring one, 6 weeks. And eventually I plan on turning it into an online course as well for people that can't get to
Okay.
Southern California. Because I really do think there's a hunger out there for people that want to tell their stories, that need
Mhm.
something to motivate them and to push them a little bit. And I think that'll be a fun way to kind of take it out beyond just the scope of a classroom in Southern California.
Well, and we need to hear those stories too, because there's so much that comes out of those. So much.
We do. And I tell people, there's people in these classes that some want to be on the New York Times bestseller list. Some just want stories for their grandkids. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't. As long as you're documenting those records, they're going to exist for anybody. In today's day and age, you can self-publish your book and have it on Amazon in an hour. You know what I mean? And the whole world has access to it. So there's no reason today to not, no matter what your intent is in terms of sharing, there's no reason to not document your story. Somebody's going to want to look at it at some point. Somebody will learn something from it. And beyond that, people, you feel, a sense of birth once you've done it. Once you've delivered your story, I think that there is a real sense of joy and accomplishment, that you've done something, really vital.
Yes. And that's a great note to wrap it up. Chris, thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.
I did too. And as you're watching this, your next step is to go to chrisepting.com. That's chrisepting.com. If you have more questions for Chris, you want to find out more about the class,
absolutely,
go there. And he's very engaging and great to work with. Chris, thanks again. And thank you for watching.
Thank you, Jeff.
We're having an adventure. How about you? We'll be right back after this message.
Smart CSM is a disruptor in the electrical industry. It's a visual database of your entire electrical infrastructure. Imagine being able to look at your iPad, click on a button, and see your breaker panel and understand the affected areas. It's a total game changer in the electrical infrastructure space.
It's technology that's built by electricians for electricians, and it's the ultimate mapping software. There's nothing else like it. So when we utilize it in the field, it allows facility infrastructure managers to more accurately diagnose problems that arise on a day-to-day basis.
Smart CSM streamlines the process of getting data to your field workers. If you have a generator and you have a sequence of operations to restart that generator, you can store that in Smart CSM. If you need a user guide in the field, you can store that. If you want to look at your IR scan and compare it to last year's IR scan, you can do that on your iPad.
So since I've started utilizing Smart CSM in our electrical contracting business, I've seen about $1 million of additional sales that we didn't have before. As the electrical contractor, we've become our customers' back office plan room. Recently, our customer, they asked us to map and trace their entire 100,000 square foot parking lot lighting system. Well, we already had the information in our system, and we were able to save them $20,000 by just pulling up the prints that we had done a year before.
Smart CSM is the definition of operational efficiency.
We joined our next guest, Rick Harrison, at the SoCal World Guitar Show to talk with him about his founding of RH Custom Guitars and to see firsthand the playable works of art that he builds for his clients. I'm Jeffrey Wolf with AdventureCEO Leadership Insights, and today we are at the SoCal World Guitar Show at the Hangar on the OC County Fairgrounds, and I'm with Rick Harrison, founder of RH Custom Guitars. Rick, thanks for talking with us today.
Oh, thanks for coming out.
And what we're going to take a look at here in just a second are some of the most amazing guitars you're ever going to see. Rick makes a custom-built, hand-built custom guitars. These are one-offs. When you have one of the RH custom guitars in your hands, it is a one-of-a-kind. No one else has your guitar, just you. And these are legendary for being, don't need to change them, nothing to adjust, ready to go out of the box when they get in the hands of professionals and guitarists like yourself. Rick, How did you get started with making custom guitars?
Well, I've worked with wood all my life, and I was at a custom roadshow one time, Fender Custom Roadshow, and they had a guitar up on stage, and I knew what that guitar sold out of a guitar shop. But I wanted a nice piece of bird's eye maple neck on it. And I asked the guy, one of the master builders, I go, what would that guitar cost if I wanted this, nice piece of bird's eye maple instead of the plain maple neck?
Okay.
And he goes, well, you got to put it in through a custom shop and it'll take X amount of time. And I go, well, how much would something like that cost? And they said, well, from a custom shop, it'll be somewhere between $3,000 and $4,000. And I'm thinking, it more than doubled just to have a little better piece of wood for the neck?
Right, so just to have that custom wood doubles the value of the guitar.
Well, to them it does, yeah. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I can put out a better product for that kind of money. And that's what I've strived to do. I mean, my pieces, I call them playable pieces of art. Not only do they look good, but they play perfectly. I have a connection with these pickups that are very, very hard to get. 2 years ago, they were the talk of the NAMM show. Okay. And unless you were with this guy when he
now what's the NAMM show? Because some of our viewers, they're not familiar with that.
Music Association or whatever.
Okay.
That's where all the vendors come. It's held twice a year, once in LA and then once in Nashville. That's where for all the sellers, buyers, musicians, anybody that's tied up in the music industry. They have all types of musical instruments there for them to see. It's not open to the public.
Oh wow! So it's really an insider industry.
Yes.
Okay.
I have a friend on the East Coast, northeast part of the country, who's a musician and very, very busy in the music industry out there, whether he's playing bass for one band or guitar for another or putting on and promoting shows. Well, we had talked about him a build for him, and before we could pull the trigger on it, he suffered a stroke. So after talking with him and getting his ideas of what he liked and didn't like, I'm building this in his honor. And he even helped me name it. It's called the Paul E, after his name, Paul Englehart. And I can't wait to see this one when it's finished, completely finished, because it's going to be just a beauty. It's Zeracody on the top, is a two-piece carved top with maple on the second. Bird's eye maple neck is this 5A quality bird's eye maple. With the finishes on it, you'll see all the bird's eye in there. But this will just be stunning once it's done. And once again, it will just sound perfect.
Well, and when the finish goes on, I'll be interested to see how the wood grain pops.
Right.
Well, that's a beautiful grain.
Well, I'll show you a guitar down the line that give you an idea of what it'll look like when it's got thick gloss on it.
Okay. Rick, you were talking about what happens when people commission guitars. So they get a truly one-off custom guitar. Could you talk about that process? It's just fascinating how people have such a wide selection of imagination. You can get your own fretboard wood, pick out your wood for the body. How does that work?
Yes, somebody comes to me, they want me to build a guitar. So immediately start talking about types of woods, what it might want to look like. I'll throw in some ideas, and we get started. Like when I built a guitar for Mark Kendall, his tour guitar for Great White. He was one of the easiest guys ever. He just wanted some natural wood, so I picked out some different types of spalted, because I mean that's very creative wood. You don't have to do anything to it except put finish on it. And he finally decided on a particular piece that he liked, and then I just did my stuff for the rest of it. But some people, they want certain thicknesses of the neck at certain frets, so on and so forth. I did a bass for the original bass player for Great White, who quit the band like 2 weeks before they got signed because...
Oh, no!
Yeah, he was tired of living in garages. But now he's a studio musician. He's worked with people like Johnny Hyland and a lot of the big names.
Holy cow.
Yeah, he's strictly a studio musician now, and he lives in Hawaii. So he saw Mark's guitar, and he came to me, man, will you build me a bass? I said, well, certainly. So he says, this is my bucket list bass. He had a list of everything he wanted on it. So I built this bass for him. And he just, like a kid at Christmas, he said, man, this is the best thing I've ever had. I can't believe it. It's got everything I want. I didn't have to settle for anything. He goes, you know what? If anybody wants to know about your instruments, you give them my phone number. I don't care. I'll talk to anybody about them, which you can't ask for more than that.
Yeah.
I mean, would you hand your phone number out to just anybody?
No, not at all.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's what happens. And so when you go to my website, The few models that you might see on it are just there so you can get an idea of the quality of what I do, because 90% of what I make, nobody really ever gets to see.
We then had a rare opportunity to see 3 guitars that Rick had built for a collector.
These 3 are all sold. Now, they are bought by a collector. Now, I met this collector, and he was trying to get Fender to build him a custom red Telly. And they kept putting him off and putting him off and putting him off. And he heard about me, and he approached me and said, well, can you build me one? And it's like, well, of course, that's what I do. So I said, well, let me think about it, and I'll come up with a nice design. Well, that night I had a dream of this guitar, of what it looks like with the inlay and all that stuff. And that's what happens to me. A lot of my guitars, I have dreams, and I wake up, I draw it out, I go to my office, I draw it out on paper, and then I'm immediately on the internet to try to find the wood to match what was in my dream. So this is a burl maple, and I'll put a light on it in a minute to show you that you can see it through. It's with a trans red finish, so you can see it through there. This is a Bacote fingerboard with really gnarly grain in it. Through the center, I have a spalted maple stripe with Bacote, quarter-inch Bacote strips running down the side to tie it into the fingerboard. And once again, well, that's right, this don't have a back piece to it. Yes, it does. There's the spalted covers, real wood, to match something on the front of the guitar, not plastic. So while I'm
the same from the front and the back.
Yes. So while I'm building this guitar here was at my house. This guitar was used by Mark Kendall of Great White for a documentary.
Oh, no kidding. So this actually appeared in Great White's documentary?
Yes, it's called The Metal Meltdown, and Mark signed it on the back. It was at my house, and he would come over, the fellow buying this would come over and he'd play it, and he really liked it. And he asked me, he goes, is this for sale? And it's like, once again, it's like, yeah, that's what I do. So he said, okay, I want it. So he bought that one. So when he comes back to pick this one up when it's ready, this one here, which is the same top as the Paul E,
okay,
was sitting on the table. It was finished. The body was finished. I needed to put the electronics on it. And there's an idea of what the grain looks like on it. And that's what the Paul E will look like once it gets the shiny finish on it. Isn't that beautiful? And look at the bird's eye, 5A quality bird's eye neck. See, this is the type of stuff I'm always looking for to put into my guitars, not just plain maple, plain Indian rosewood, plain anything.
Well, the detail on the wood grains is incredible.
Yeah, that's very important to me. So this guitar was sitting on the table, getting ready to put the pickups and the hardware and all that stuff on it. And the guy looks at me and he goes, is this one sold? And I said, not yet. He looked at me and winked and said, it is now. So this collector bought all 3 of these guitars within a month. And he's thinking about a 4th. I love this guy.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's like the rock star that made the message about how he just needs your guitar to do all the different sounds.
Right.
To have an investor buy 3 and now be talking about a 4th, it's the best possible advertising.
Yes, and this collector that bought my guitars, he already has over 100.
Rick's guitars are also popular with rock stars. He shared the story of how Mark Kendall from Great White became one of Rick's biggest fans.
Mark Kendall of Great White. I mean, this guy's been a rock and roller forever.
Yeah.
He tried my guitars. I met him one day in a pool hall. He plays pool.
Now, you're also a very accomplished pool player, I understand.
I'm not bad. But don't tell anybody. But
tournament level.
Oh yes,
expert.
Yes. I just got back from Vegas from a national tournament. But I approached him and I said, hey, this is what I do. You know, you're an old-time rock and roller. How about if you have some time, sit down and play a couple of my guitars and tell me what you think. He said, sure. He played 2 of my instruments. He says, I've got to have one for tour. He said, these are the best guitars I have ever played. Everything I need out of them, they're there. And so...
What a huge endorsement.
Yeah, and he's been playing it for 4 years.
For 4 years. And that's the only guitar that he used?
Only guitar. They just came out with a new CD, and the big hit off the CD is called Big Time. So check it out.
So on Big Time, it showcases the sound of that guitar.
Right. But everybody has been contacting him, you know, well, what guitar did you use for this song? And what guitar did you use for that song? So after a period of time, he came out with a statement. He said, for all of you that want to know all the different instruments I used on this CD, he said, to be honest with you, about 95% of everything used on this CD I did with my RH Custom because it does everything I want it to do. You can't,
That's good.
yeah, you can't get any better than that.
No, I can't. To have someone that enjoys your product or service that much,
Right.
that they make such a strong statement, that's great.
Yeah. This one here is the Barnyard Boy that we've been talking about. It's a two-piece carved top. I have maple on the second layer and the barnyard wood on the top layer. And as you can see, I left all the little nooks and crannies in there. It's really a neat effect. Now, you can spend a lot of money on a custom guitar from some of these other builders, and their pickup rings are plastic. Mine are wood. The plates on the back will be plastic. Mine are wood to match something on the front part of the guitar. Once again, as custom as possible.
And I've seen that before. I never thought about that.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
100% wood as opposed to
plastic.
plastic.
Right.
Now, does that make a difference in the sound as well?
Not a whole lot because there's not enough of it, but it
Okay.
makes a difference in the quality for the price you're paying. That's the way I see it.
There is something that makes a huge difference in the sound and provides Rick a competitive advantage.
And so unless you were with this guy making these pickups from the beginning, it's hard to get because it's only one guy and he can't produce them fast enough for everybody. And luckily, I've got a connection to get them. On my website, this guitar here is demonstrated. And we play the same song over and over again, but we just changed the pickup configuration to show all the different tones you can get out of my guitars. You can play everything from jazz to hard rock to country without switching the guitars.
So, yeah, I always wondered about that because you see a lot of bands and professionals, they always have a line of guitars out on stage.
Right.
So that's why they do that, to
They
get a
want
different
sound. Yes, yes. I have a fellow by the name of Jamie Dupree playing my guitars. He's a guy up in Canada. He's real big known in the YouTube fame. He's made so many different songs that he's done that's had millions of shares or whatever. He does a video talking about my guitar and demonstrates it also, and he's on my website.
As we began wrapping up, our conversation turned to Rick's journey as an entrepreneur and really the fun that he has along the way. And having joy in what you do, I mean, that's really important as entrepreneurs. It's easy in the grind of running a business, building a business, to lose that, why did we get started?
Right.
And that enjoyment of what we're doing.
Right. But it's such a thrill to me to see somebody that gets the guitar and they play it for the first time. They see it for the first time. Well, like the collector on this red one here. When I told him to come over and take a look at it, I hadn't put the hardware on it yet, but the finish was done so he could see the wood. I had this guitar here, the Purple Passion.
Okay.
And that was in the same position. Well, see, I'd already talked to him about that one, and so he had an idea of what it was going to look like. But when I invited him over, and I had a camera set up, and I filmed this whole thing, I brought him over, and I had that one laying on the table, which is completely different. And I go, well, there it is. How does it look? And you could see the disappointment in his face because he could remember what I showed him in the drawing, you know.
Right.
And he's trying not to let me know he's disappointed because he thinks it's his guitar.
And you're just having some fun with it.
Oh yeah, my wife and I, we are just dying. And so he goes, well, yeah, this is really nice, but it just seems different for some reason. And so we started laughing, and I brought that one out, and then you could really see the look on his face. It's like, bing, okay.
So another question that I'd like to ask is, since you started making custom guitars, both from the creative process, but also from the business side of it, what have you learned that you wish you knew when you were starting out?
How could I put this? How fickle people are.
Oh, okay.
I mean, you have no idea the people that come to me, and we work out every detail down to the finest little nook and cranny, and then when it comes time for the deposit, it's like, okay, well, I'll get back to you.
Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, we go through the process of picking out the wood, the whole 9 yards, because when I commission a guitar, once everything is set, you know, and locked in on paper, what you want, this, that, and the other, I get a deposit, And once I get a deposit and start on that guitar, the deposit's non-refundable. And I run into that all the time.
Well, that's the moment of truth right there.
Yes. I mean, I spend more time probably talking to people and working out the details than I actually do building the guitars. I had a guy one time come in. He gave me a deposit for a guitar. We started it, built it. It was ready for him to pick up. He came in. He saw another guitar that I was working on that was twice the price of what he got.
Oh my gosh.
He liked it, fell in love with it, and says, "I want that one instead." I go, "What do you mean instead?" I said, "You've already put a deposit on that one." He said, "Keep it. I want that one." And he bought that one.
Really?
Yes.
And it was twice the price.
As much as the one that he'd put a deposit on.
Wow.
Yeah. That's like, wow, okay. Because see, like this one here, everybody may not like that particular model.
Yes.
So once I build something for a person, his personal taste and so on and so forth, I may have that guitar forever if he doesn't buy it. So that's why the deposit is
Yeah, exactly. I hadn't thought about that because it is truly a custom guitar for that person,
the looks
for
of
their
it,
taste, the look that they want. Yeah.
Right. I mean,
Wow.
Eventually one day it might sell, but there's no guarantee that it would. So that's why I say that there's once I start it, the deposit's non-refundable.
Yes. Rick did share one last set of special guitars done in conjunction with legendary craftsman George Amiche, formerly of Fender.
Okay, this is the cowboy that I was talking about. Now you see the rope binding going around the guitar, the F-hole and the headstock that I was talking about. You can hit that with a magnifying glass and not see a mistake anywhere, along with the cactus flower at the bottom. And the hand tool leather to go along with it, kind of like the saddle, the leather in the saddle to complement the Western appeal. This is a list of all the guys that George has done work for through the years, like, let's see here, Eric Clapton, John Strait, Merle Haggard, Waylon Jennings, Bob Dylan, just Ernie Isley, just a number of people that he's done work for through the years. He's very well known, very well known. This one here is called the Floral Perfection because of all the flowers and everything in it. And in the vein, you can see the veins in the leaves. And once again, he did this with an X-Acto knife. Very pretty. But not only are these guitars beautiful, but they still, just like all my others, they play and sound wonderful. They're not just lookers. Although, these are probably more for a collector because you wouldn't want to put one of these up on stage and risk somebody stealing it. And then here's the final one, the medieval one. Medieval times with the lion and the torch, and that's all hand carved. And then he went back and gold and silver leafed everything. Just beautiful work, just very small, intricate cuts and designs that he did with an X-Acto knife. George Amiche.
Well, Rick, I really appreciate your time. You know, viewers, you really want to go to Rick's website because we just had enough time to barely scratch the surface on the guitars, and there's more examples, and you can hear the sound from the guitar as well.
Yes.
So I really appreciate your time. Thanks
All
for
right,
being
man.
with us. And your website is
RHCustomGuitars.com.
rhcustomguitars.com. Rick,
Yes,
thank
sir.
you very much.
Well, thank you, sir.
Entrepreneurs, thanks for being with us today. We're having an adventure. How about you? Thank you for joining us on Adventure CEO Leadership Insights. I'm glad you're part of the journey. I'm glad you're a part of the conversation, and look forward to having you with us in the conversation on our next episode. By the way, if you have any comments, suggestions, or even a guest you'd like to have on the show in the future, send us an email at fan@adventureceo.tv. Again, that's fan, F-A-N, at adventureceo.tv. Until then, we're having an adventure. How about you?